All right, let's rock and
Okay,
roll.
so awesome. Yeah, welcome everyone who's in attendance, and welcome to everyone else who will be listening to this on a recording at a later date. Um, as you can imagine, we're all very excited about this next phase and this next chapter of THORChain as we start to ramp up the lending feature. So the goal of this space today, or this stage, is to update everyone in the community about what the next steps are going to be in terms of turning lending on, as well as setting expectations um, just around how things are going to look in the early days and how things are going to ramp up. And it will be good to get everyone sort of on the same page as we start to have the discussions around the initial launch parameters. So the way that we'll do this is we'll basically, yeah, we'll have a quick I'll give a quick introduction as to kind of at a high level what the process is going to look like over this next month or two as we get the feature fully turned on, and then I'll turn it over to Orion to talk about a new development in the sort of testing and auditing phase of the lending feature, and then we'll jump into a technical Q&A with Chris and Son of Odin, and then we'll round it out with a general Q&A for people from the audience. So save your questions till the end. If there is anything super context specific, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll do our best of our ability to bring you up and ask the question. So yeah, with all that being said, let's basically just dive right in and talk about the lending rollout. So the general strategy that we're taking with the lending rollout is to approach it in two phases, and that's really a pre-launch and then a hard launch. The goal of the pre-launch is just to collect feedback from the community, to participate in a third party, both economic and technical audit of the lending feature. And hopefully within the entire community, we can come to a consensus between the Nine Realms devs, the core devs, node operators, all of you in the audience, everyone on Twitter. We want to hear your feedback on what people think about like the proposed starting parameters are, and then essentially take all of that and package that up into an ADR. Some of you might be familiar with the ADR process by now, but if you're not and you're just tuning in for the first time, or are otherwise not as involved on that side of things, the ADR process is a design. It's essentially a governance method that we've adopted at THORChain in order to bring the most important pieces of information to the decision makers, who ultimately are the node operators of this network. So anytime we want to make a change, it's up to the developers to build the feature, code it, but ultimately it's up to node operators to decide if and when to turn that on. And for some of the more advanced features like synths or lending, there's going to be certain economic constants that need to be decided on. And really what those economic constants come down to is the amount of risk that the operators of the network deem as being permissible. So this whole process during the pre-launch is largely going to be around coming to consensus about what those parameters are and how much risk, given the risk framework that is currently being developed, we are comfortable with taking as a protocol. And then walking that in slowly and conservatively so that we can, see actual loans being taken out in the wild, and then, ramp up accordingly. So we're kind of splitting those up in the sense that, the biggest hurdle is basically, coming to a consensus and then getting that voted through the ADR governance process. And if and when that passes, then the feature will be live. However, we're asking that the community not take that as a time to, blow it all up on Twitter and, tell everyone they know about THORChain lending, because during this pre-launch phase, it's not going to be in a state that really is usable by ordinary users. In fact, we're going to roll it out so conservatively at the beginning that it won't make sense for most users to use the feature. And the goal really around the pre-launch phase is just to collect data about how the real world virtual pool depths for the derived assets are performing, how how it basically is working in production before we start to ramp that up and start lending out millions of rune worth of debt. So really, yeah, that's kind of and I just wanted to hop in first and clarify sort of the decision making distinguishing between this soft launch phase, which is really just a functional technical launch, and then the actual ramp up, which is determining, okay, given these this risk appetite that the community seems to have, which parameters should we shift in order to ramp up the amount of debt that we're lending out, and then also establish what the success criteria are for the feature, and also determine what possible things could attempt us to halt or abort the experiment. And we'll get into that later, vis-a-vis the circuit breaker, which we can get into the mechanics of that later. But all of that is to say that lending, as THORChain has developed it, is a groundbreaking feature that hasn't been attempted by many other protocols. There's a few that share some design similarities with THORChain, which I think is a good validation of the work that we've kind of done in isolation. But that's not to say that it's not without risk. So better to ramp up safely. And then once everyone, the community, the devs, everyone is kind of happy where things are at. We've seen some loans taken out, we've seen some repaid, and generally things are trending in the right direction. Then we can start to ramp up the feature even more. So that's a little bit of an overview. And of course, when we get into that hard launch phase, when it does start ramping up, then it will become a product that is attractive for the average borrower to use. And at that time, I think it would be best suited that the community concentrate our firepower in Twitter and marketing, and really going out and telling the whole world about this product. So yourselves all here today, some of the folks that are kind of closest to the project, we really have appreciated so much your guys' participation. Thousands and thousands of messages have been sent in the economic design and lending channels. Lots of people from the community just outside of the core developers have contributed to this feature. And so, we want to take a moment of gratitude to thank you all for not only that continued commitment to the project and really understanding this feature and helping to contribute, but also, just for being here and showing up in the community and making this community so great. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Orion to speak briefly about the economic audit that we have begun right now. And that's sort of, it's somewhat different from the technical testing that we've already been doing in StageNet so far, and with the regression testing framework that Ursa built. So in that sense, from a technical standpoint, we're very confident that the feature works as it was designed, and so from this point forward, really we're entering a phase of economic auditing to identify what things can possibly go wrong, but I don't want to jump too far into that. I'll just turn it over to Orion at this point to discuss what that entails, and it's something that I'm very excited about. So Orion, would you like to quick overview?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Pluto, for the quick intro there, and also echoing the words of gratitude for the community. Yeah, so just jumping into this, on behalf of the community, Nine Realms has been really focused on bringing in a third-party economic auditing firm around lending specifically. And like any security audit, this would include kind of understanding adversarial attack vectors and digging into the lending feature set. to help kind of guide the initial launch. And this has been a process over the last few months, but actually started a year ago. Things have finally kind of landed there, and I'm really excited to announce that Block Science has agreed to participate in be our kind of economic auditing partner here. For those that aren't familiar, Block Science is a crypto economic research and simulation firm that's also responsible for developing a lot of the open source risk modeling tools in the kind of broader crypto space. So just catching everybody up, we had kind of initial kickoff call with the Block Science team on Friday to get them onboarded. And they've already started to push code to the THORChain project under the miscellaneous subdirectory, and you'll start to see math spec repo specifically. And their kind of first task, their first deliverable is a report that encompasses an initial review of this lending feature set with recommendations on ranges for starting parameters. And the goal is to have that report help support the initial ADR for the launch. So really excited to bring them aboard. You'll start to see a couple folks in our dev Discord with Block Science tags. Those folks are working closely with the core devs in 9 Realms in order to kind of get onboarded and up to speed with the lending feature, as well as digging into their initial reporting. From there, from the initial report, then they're going to move into a series of simulation projects. And the idea around that is motivated from their initial report. They're going to start to identify areas that could pose economic risk to THORChain, and then build out or leveraging their simulation framework. They're going to start building out simulations that help us understand what the risks are and how to either add business logic to THORChain or add incentives in order to help push the network into a safe position. And then that will also motivate other alerting and other things kind of outside of THORChain itself. And then beyond that initial simulation, then they'll start to move into kind of more adversarial simulation around manipulating anchor pool prices and other sorts of things in order to validate all of the systems that we have put in place. One of the things that I think is important to understand here is bringing in a third party to help do this sort of analysis is really kind of a crucial piece to all of us having confidence in scaling lending, and I think it will be a really great collaborative process in order to strengthen lending more and more, so that we are ready to scale, and not from millions but even higher into billions as well. So I think that there's a lot of these are just the first steps here. If you have any questions about this, feel free to drop them in a thread. Happy to answer any questions related to that. But yes, really excited to bring everybody this news, and super excited to work with Block Science. They've been a great partner, and it's been amazing to see just over a couple of days that they're starting to ask very pointed questions around the feature set. Let's see, do we have any questions? Not seeing any there.
Yeah, I would just love to reiterate how awesome they've been, how quickly they've been able to ramp up, and really how impressive their offering is. They developed an open source framework called CAD, which lets them do complex modeling of economic systems. So they've already started to basically reverse engineer the THORChain lending feature into a math spec that they can use with their framework. We got a little bit of a just sort of like a crash course on all that as we were ramping up with them. And yeah, it's going to add a level of rigor to this next phase that is unprecedented so far in THORChain's development. So rather than just kind of building, and it's easy for us as devs to get kind of caught up in the vacuum of the great ideas and the echo chamber of our own community. And so it's really great to bring in a third party that can really validate us and really doesn't have any real they don't really have any real bias when they come to us. They're looking at this from a very objective set of eyes. So yeah, with that being said, I'm really happy to be working with them, and Orion, Gavin, and all others. Akila, thanks for helping to land that. That's going to be a really key partnership for us. So yeah, with that being said, I was going to invite Chris and Son of Odin to give a quick technical Q&A. I can potentially have some questions to start off with, but Chris, if there was anything from you that you wanted to, basically the goal of this Q&A is really, I mean, it's a lot of questions that I think many us as devs know the answer to already, but that we've already been sourcing sort of questions from the community and sort of frequently asked questions that we'll now ask in sort of a conversational style back and forth, that hopefully all of you can glean more of an understanding of sort of the technical details of the product. So Chris, if you had anything to start off with, I'll turn it over to you now.
Yes, I've got some questions I was just hammering out before.
Your microphone just a little bit low. If you could move it closer. Or...
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's still a little bit low, but
let me just go to settings and turn that up. How's that?
Perfect.
Excellent. So if we start where lending is today, my question would be, what's the status of lending currently? What testing has been done so far? Can more testing be done in StageNet? If so, what can be done? If not, why is that the case? Did you get that?
Chad?
Yeah. Orion here. I'll start off here. We were actually just discussing this, Chris. So this is a great one. So the current state of lending right now in StageNet, users are able to open and close loans. However, there's still some kind of what I would describe as unhappy paths that we're working to solidify before we kind of think that lending is at the point where we want it on StageNet. The other thing I was going to mention is that we also have the regression testing framework that Ursa has developed that has been allowing us to surface things a lot faster than testing on StageNet. I think by release 111 or so, all of the kind of PRs that are fixing things for lending currently will be in, and then in my mind, StageNet would be a good place for folks to start pushing at kind of those happy paths and making sure that to do some validation there, and then kind of moving beyond that, looking through the regression testing, making sure that we're able to that things fail when we would expect them to, and that sort of thing. So I think that the kind of current state is there's a few more things that need to get into onto StageNet before we're it's ready to rock and roll. But that's kind of the current state of play.
And one thing to add to that is there's it sounds like there's a couple of paths being talked about, but one thing to understand is that there's nothing blocking the critical path here. And so the work that Block Science is going to be doing is going to be augmenting the release path for the initial shipping of lending. So all this stuff is in parallel paths. So it's not like one is sequenced on the other. But that's why, a lot of this stuff it works well together, but it all moves together at the same time.
Yeah. And I would just add that, StageNet kind of as its own environment, it's a good environment for allowing us to sort of test out the go live of launching new chains. For example, some of you might have just seen today, Binance Smart Chain was launched on StageNet as we prepare to bring that onto mainnet pending the node vote. So for those kind of things, testing changes to TSS, vaults, things that require sort of like the distributed consensus, but also kind of mimic the mainnet, configuration. That's kind of where StageNet thrives. Where StageNet doesn't really thrive is in giving us the ability to test against sort of what we would consider real world use cases. Notably, like StageNet doesn't have an arbitrage actor on it. So when you make a swap, there's no one that's like going in and buying up tokens off the exchange and depositing them on THORChain, like they would in a normal arbitrage action. And so lending as a feature relies on pool depths constantly being corrected by arbitrage. So in that sense, like StageNet is not the best environment to be testing some of the unhappy paths on. As far as lending, the regression testing framework is actually far better for that particular purpose and for testing the actual functionality and accounting of the lending feature itself. So Ursa actually has an open PR right now. Actually, it might have just been merged in the last couple of days, but those were to extend the regression tests. So this is actually a great primer for anyone, since these tests, if you check out this merge request that I just posted, it's called Extend Lending Regression Test. This allows us to basically go in and add a bunch of different start states, and those could be based on like accurate pool values that are sort of true to life, rather than these sort of like unbalanced pool values that we have on StageNet. So we test like uncommon flows, refunds within a lending loan open, invalid loans, loans and disabled pools, all that kind of stuff. So the regression tests make it far easier for us to test, with more anchor pools. And it's much easier to do like these sort of hypothetical tests, whereas StageNet is really just like a sort of standby network. So in that sense, like we sort of have evolved beyond this rather rudimentary testing framework of just saying like, let's open a loan, let's close a loan, let's do a partial repayment, like to actually being able to do like multi-tiered regression tests and run those against every new code build, rather than just like do some testing in lending now and then maybe a couple new features get pushed in, but then we don't, we'd have to go back and redo all that testing in StageNet. It's just a far better way of doing sort of the functional and technical testing. And then from at this point, we're sort of, moving over to like more of the economic auditing and security side of things. So I hope that answers the question, but yeah, it's really like, because the lending feature has taken on so many forms, the design has changed however many times, at least a dozen times. We've sort of been in a sort of continuous improvement of the lending feature for over a year now. So the lending stage is really going to be indistinguishable from anything else that we've been doing over the last year. We just have better tooling now to assist us with that, between the regression testing framework and Block Science's CAD framework. We feel that really gives sort of a two-pronged look into both the economic and the technical side of things.
Okay, cool. Let's obviously paraphrase. Then the idea of the soft launch would be to test lending in a real world scenario with actual ARBs and actual pool depths, because that's going to give you the deeper understanding, and that type of testing is just not possible on StageNet. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And to launch with a relatively conservative parameters that just will prevent the lending from going too crazy in the very beginning, and then being able to there's going to be an entire like post soft launch where we basically say, okay, what was the expected result? What do we expect to happen? What actually happened? Where was the delta between that? And then decide if there's any change in tack that's required, or whether we're good to just keep keep ramping it up, which is part of the deliverable of what block science will be giving us, is sort of recommendations for how to determine whether, it's, basically milestones about, where we can move on to the next phase.
Awesome. Yeah, that was actually my next question. So apart from the ADR and the values in the ADR, like the lending lever and the maximum CR and stuff like that, what else would be the output from block science that the community be able to see, like the CAD output and analysis? What would you expect the community to see from block science?
Yeah, so Orion here, we've asked that CAD open source all of the work that they do. So in addition to the math spec, which they're pushing to currently, all of their reports, or their kind of initial report and intermediate reports, as well as the various simulation parameters and simulation tool will all be available in the THORChain GitLab project. And the idea with all of this is we want to have the community, able to understand the tools that are being used. So I'll also work with them around organizing some walkthroughs of that. But just to answer your question, the idea is that everything that they produce will be open sourced for the community, and that's the goal.
That's great. Awesome.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say one of the particular other things that they're gonna help us out with is kind of like knowing what to look for. Basically figuring out, like, if someone were to try to attack this network, this would be what the vectors are, and then setting up an alerting framework. One thing that we kind of like just one example is, anytime a loan is taken out, like, price that using the Tor pool, but then we'll also price it using like the largest book on a centralized exchange. And if there's a delta between the two, we'll fire an alert. And if it looks super suspicious, then we can basically pause the feature and take corrective action. So in the it comes with both passive defensive mechanisms, as well as some more active as well, will be part of their recommendation. And then also basically just doing sort of like scenario like event-based scenarios. So what I specifically asked for example, was to say that we lent out 10 million rune worth of debt at the price that rune was when pre-Luna, pre the whole crash of crypto in general around this time last year. Say we had 10 million rune worth of open loans. What would happen if and then give us a couple of scenarios ranging from extremely plausible based on what actually did happen historically, to all the way to the best case, all the way to the absolute worst case. So part of their sort of modeling framework will be basically doing event-based analysis based on things that could happen in the future and things that have historically happened as well. So that'll add a little bit of color and allow us to contextualize what would have happened had the lending feature been live in the past throughout THORChain's history as well. So it'll be a bit of a look back as well.
And there's also a bit of maturing as a community that we get to do, right? So the tools that Orion was mentioning that shake out of this are going to be open source. And so we've got really technical conversations going on in multiple channels here in Discord. So in terms of competence, our aggregate community is very learned up in terms of the primitives here. And so getting a suite of tools that we can actually put into everybody's hands, where we can start to run different types of simulations and look at things. So it's not just, one team necessarily doing things, but distributing these tools so that the next chapter of THORChain's development looks a little bit different, where we can all actually drive things with this, is something that we haven't quite had yet. So pretty stoked on that side too, when you think about it.
Yeah, cool. Absolutely. Giving anyone the ability to plug in their own series of events, being able to basically seed being able to seed from the current mainnet values, and then apply any series of events on top of that, and then basically run a simulation to see what happens to the rune supply, for example, or the pool depths, or the the collateralization ratio, what that would be if X event happened. So yeah, I think that's just going to be a huge capability just in terms of being able to outsource more analysis to the community.
Yeah, because now people can show up in whatever channel they're in and bring some data to the conversation. It doesn't wind up in these long threads. We can actually just run the sims, watch it span out, and have the conversation take place.
Awesome. That leads me to two questions that I've got, and I'll start with the first one on a reactive point of view. So we know that the circuit breaker is a feature of last resort. We don't hit that, and we also know there's a 15 million rune buffer approximately between the native supply and the total supply. So how will developers monitor the actual rune burn and stuff like that? Are there any triggers in place, so e.g. if it's going below that 15 million? And what actions, are there any actions taken or planned to be taken place? Or is this perhaps a touch too early?
So maybe we can have Orion quickly touch on the lending dashboard, and then maybe Son of Odin can chime in and talk about the circuit breaker.
Yeah, sure. So we have a lending health dashboard that I'm fleshing out currently that would address kind of rune burn stats, and we can add alerting off of that. But that would be kind of the first place for folks to track that. And then your second question, I think, was around like whether it was sorry, can you remind me what your second question was there, Chris? Sorry.
So I think the first thing's we identification. So identification trigger points, as in like if this scenario were to occur, what would we do about it? These would be the actions to take. Maybe that's changing some parameters to provide some relief, or to do some other action. So identification, if we have some trigger points, and actions to do if things aren't looking as good as you want them to.
Yeah, I think we need to be really, as a community, we need to be really kind of aware of and trying not to oversteer things. And I think, from the get-go, THORChain wants to be, governance minimized. However, in this initial launch period, I think as part of the initial ADR, having some discussion around like what the appropriate interventions might be, and what the plan is in the event that kind of the initial launch, that there's issues that we want to address. I think that should be addressed in the ADR. So I think it's a bit early to say what those are specifically, but I think that's kind of the initial standpoint will be, we want to have some ability to course correct if we need it, but have that spelled out, upfront.
That's good. That's good.
Just want to give Son of Odin a chance to chime in here. We haven't been able to hear you speak yet. I'm wondering if you're just having mic issues or anything like that.
No, you guys are doing a good job on your own. So far, you guys haven't needed my perspective, but the circuit breaker is there in part because we wanted to maintain the monetary policy of the rune asset itself, which has always been a market cap of 500 million. And so the circuit breaker is if the scenario were to arrive that we would need to mint beyond that 500 million, instead of actually changing the monetary policy, the network would borrow some room from the reserve effectively to which is about 35% of the supply of the asset approximately, to be able to supply the purchasing power required to acquire the collateral back of whatever loan we're talking about. That's also there just to kind of to ensure that there can not be any kind of massive unwinding, terror style, whatever, where the supply of rune would balloon up to 1.3 trillion as it did for Luna. And it always maintains its value. It's enough value, but it's supply cap of 500 million.
And I think your sort of hypothesis has always been that if we are trending in the wrong direction, if we do see net mint of rune occurring over it'll be occurring over sort of a longer time period. Like it won't really catch us by surprise. we'll kind of see that happening as a shift. And at that point, we can kind of, as a community, take a step back and decide, what mitigations, if any, are necessary. So it's, yeah, along with the lending dashboard, and the community keeping a watchful eye ourselves, we'll be able to identify, whether things look healthy, and they shouldn't, turn in the wrong direction too quickly if they do at all.
Yeah, it's unlikely to get close to the supply cap. I mean, it's definitely certainly possible, but considering that there's a cap of approximately 5 million ruin initially, and we have 15 of space, that would effectively mean that we'd have to max out that 5 million worth of collateral being added to the network, and then we see a 3x price change downward on rune's price relative to asset. And then on top of that, you would also have to see 100% of the loans be closed, which is also in any scenario that would be pretty crazy. The likelihood of that happening is especially at the bottom of the bear, is fairly unlikely. But of course, it's always a possibility. That's why we start small and concise and conservative in our initial testing. Yeah.
There's also been talk, and we may or may not include this in the initial ADR. Probably not in the initial ADR, but probably something for a follow-up in terms of scaling. Getting to that next phase where we kind of move into the hard launch. But there is a 60 million rune standby reserve that has not been deployed into the network yet, and so the node operators in the community could, actually elect to burn a portion of that, maybe burn 15 million rune right off the bat, just to enlarge the buffer and to create more space for lending. So we can kind of discuss that, but that's certainly something that we have that ability in our back pocket as well, to basically press the gas on this whenever we feel that is necessary. So there is some aspect of timing to this. I think overall we want to make sure that people are taking out more loans when the market is bear, and that they're not paying back loans when the market is bull. And there's a bit of a balancing act required there that the lending lever hopes to achieve dynamically. But there are still things that are sort of a matter of governance, like what to do with the standby reserve, how much the lending lever should be, that are things that effectively we have, and the community and node operators ultimately have control over, that can either speed up or slow down. And this kind of all kind of reflects the state of THORChain itself being its own encapsulated economy in a way. Much like any economy, it has a function of lending and savings, which is those two functions are the sort of the backbone of any sophisticated or modern economy. If you look at how economists actually like the way economists determine the money supply is what is it, ISLM model, but basically like investment, saving, lending, money. I think if my macro econ knowledge serves me properly. But if you actually look at THORChain, it encapsulates all of those things into one. And so we really are building a self-sustaining economy for the 21st century here at THORChain, and it's really exciting to see. And so despite the fact that we're trying to make it governance minimal, it may require a bit of guiding hand in its early days, just to make sure that it gets set for success into the future. So definitely, yeah, just part of the adventure of just seeing how all of this unfolds, and yeah, really excited to see it. Sorry to take us off track a bit there.
That's okay. It's good. What I'm getting, there's monitoring, a bit understanding what's happening, and there are options for as a part of, we're seeing something we don't like, and we can do stuff about that. That's burning rune. That's perhaps tweaking some things. There are options on the table. Obviously, the ADR will give more insight, but even now, it sounds like there are some good options on the table. I did want to pull on a thread that was discussed. And one of some of the questions I've got is, there's going to be the situation, since there's no liquidations, there's no time periods you have to pay it off, and there's zero interest, that there's going to be a possibility that the collateral will be worth less than the actual debt taken out, depending where things might be over a 4-year cycle. So maybe Leo or Simon, Odin, if you could talk through loans over a 4-year cycle. So we're starting out now, the BDC dominance is very high, which is actually very good for lending. So walk through how you see things moving through to the bull market, say 25, and then into the next bear in say 26 and beyond, how loans are taking out, where the collateral could be worth less than the actual debt taken, and then how do you see lending handle that, and what situations you would see kind of over that longer time period?
Yeah, so if generally any lending protocol we've seen, if the value of the collateral falls below the value of the debt, that becomes a problem, right? That becomes insolvency. That becomes, oh, the lender has failed. The lender lost money. Blah blah blah. And that's always like a very disastrous scenario. But because of this lending design is so different in the way that it's structured, it's not really barely even remotely close to anything we've seen before, either in TradFi, CFI, or in DeFi. The structure is different. And so if the scenario happens where the collateral drops below the value of the debt, it's actually a positive thing for the network, where that would topple other protocols that would cause insolvency and other issues. In our scenario, that's actually a positive thing for the network. It actually helps the network, which is so counterintuitive. And if you're coming to THORChain's lending with the mindset of all those other lending protocols, it's really confusing. And, I can understand why that would feel that way. But for us, it's actually a positive thing. It actually removes risk and liability from the network itself, and so the network actually profits from that scenario.
Sweet. So if a whole bunch of loans taken out in the next bull run, and then there's a big decline for whatever reason, it's just not a problem. Obviously, users aren't going to pay back, because why would you trade debt at a higher value for collateral of a lesser value? And then the network gets to keep that collateral, which keeps the pools deep, which is favorable to the protocol.
It keeps that collateral, which just ensures that Rune is basically burned from supply. It doesn't really relate necessarily to the depth of pools per se, but other than just the effect that it has on the Rune price itself. But yeah, I mean that it can have a very think this way. So when you look at all the loans that are open currently, say there's 1,000 loans open, let's just say, and let's just assume that's 1,000 BDC and total collateral. And if you were to mathematically say, okay, if all these loans were to close right now, yeah, right, and they were to go back to the layer 1 BDC, which would cause some minting of Rune to do so, how much Rune would be minted, right? It'd be some number, just arbitrarily, whatever number that is. But if some of those loans are underwater in the sense that the collateral is worth less than the debt, then those loans can't be closed, and so the amount of Rune that can be minted in that scenario is less than the actual amount of collateral expected from people, right? So it actually makes the network more profits from such a scenario. So this creates an asymmetric relationship between when loans can be opened and closed versus when they can't, or more specific on the closed part. So like in a bullish market, loans can be closed, which is probably good for the network because Rune being a small market cap asset, its natural tendency is to be outperforming higher market cap assets like Bitcoin, for example. Like during the last bull market, the Bitcoin was one of the worst performing assets during the bull market out of all of them, except for the ones that crashed completely, like Luna, for example. And so, but the bad scenario from THORChain's perspective is when people are closing loans in a bear market, and that's harder to do if your collateral is worth less than the debt. It's not really actually viable in that scenario. And so it's actually that asymmetric relationship should, over the long term, not from day to day or even month to month, or maybe not even quarter to quarter, but like over the long term, net positive for the protocol.
Sweet. just to extend, just hit another question that I've been getting. So we know that POL and savings is not related to lending, unlike perhaps other lending protocols. Lending is independent of these features. So could you talk specifically, where is the collateral held and where is the debt taken from? If we were to say USDT was the actual debt asset.
Yeah. So when you open your loan, you're giving the network a layer one asset like Bitcoin, for example, and then that is being swapped to Rune, and that Rune is being converted into Thor BTC, a derived asset of Bitcoin itself. So it's burning that Rune to create the Thor BTC, and so the network holds it. Not so much the layer one asset itself. It doesn't really. That's just deposited into the pool, and the pool does what it does with it. The network holds a form of a derived asset, or maybe you can even refer to it as an IOU in a matter of speaking, that the network holds on your behalf. And then once you receive your debt, which you'll receive, maybe you'll receive USDT, maybe you'll receive Bitcoin, or whatever it is, the network mints some room to create that purchasing power, to create that value, and push that value through the pools to be able to acquire the asset that you want to receive when you get your debt. The relationship between those two things in terms of burning a bunch of Rune to, convert your collateral into an IOU, and then minting a bunch of Rune to give you your debt is always at a positive ratio between the network perspective. That's why the collateralization ratio is 200%, 300%, 1,000%, whatever the hell the number is going to be when that actually goes live. So it's always a beneficial from the network perspective. Like even on the initial time that you open the loan, the network's already in profit, and it doesn't matter what happens to Bitcoin's price after that point. It can go up, it could go down. In that moment, as long as the loan is open, the network is in profit no matter what.
Good. I've got two more questions. If we talk about the protections, so we talked about the reactive side. I want to talk about the proactive side of lending. And I know in my video I talked about the virtual pool depths responding to trade volume. I know there are some other protections. Can you just talk about that in a bit more detail and some of the other inbuilt protections within lending to protect it against people manipulating it or trying to take advantage of lending in a way that it shouldn't?
Yeah, sure. So with any lending protocol, one of the concerns you should always be concerned about when you're designing one of these things is to be aware of how this thing could be price manipulated, right? We saw that happen not too long ago with Mango markets, where the Mango token was one of the things you could use, one of the assets you could use for collateral, which is a low liquidity asset, very small market cap, small trade volume. And the attacker basically embellished the value of that Mango token to be, I don't know what the actual number was, but it was 100x or whatever the hell the actual number was, so that they put in, X amount of value, but they got out Y amount of value from the system, which is Y is much larger than the X value. The network was just confused or manipulated to think that the X value was a lot larger than it actually was from the market perspective. So that's like one of the main things you should be concerned about when you're thinking about these kind of lending designs is that idea, and being aware of, even using oracles like Chainlink can be manipulated in one form or another. So it's like you should always be aware of these concepts. So how we deal with this to protect ourselves, we don't use oracles in the traditional sense because they come with their own myriad of problems and risks and all these kind of things. So instead, what actually happens is, in order to price manipulate the Bitcoin price, so you wanted to price manipulate Bitcoin so you can create, put one BTC, which is worth whatever the current price of Bitcoin is, was it 25 or 28 or whatever the hell the number is, of value, but you push the price of Bitcoin to be $500,000 per Bitcoin in the pool, right? You lose a bunch of money doing so, paying a bunch of money in fees, but you push the Bitcoin price to $500,000 on the pool of THORChain, and then you open a loan. So you put in one Bitcoin, but you actually get out, if $200,000 of value or whatever the hell the number would actually be. So that's price manipulation. That's how you can profit and be bad for the network in that scenario. And so what we do to protect ourselves from that scenario is that the virtual pool, which is used to burn and mint rune or burn and mint the derived asset, depending on which direction you're going, is a dynamic depth. It's not regular LPs we do, in the Bitcoin pool. It's just a virtual pool that exists that is calculated on a per swap basis. Even within a particular block, there actually recalculates the depth of this pool after every individual swap that occurs, just so it's like highly reactive to any large trades that occur. And so like your ability to price manipulate the Bitcoin pool from $25,000 or $30,000, whatever the number is, to $500,000, you can do that and have fun doing so. You'd pay LPs massive amounts of swap fees to do so. But by doing so, the virtual pool becomes so shallow that if you were to try to open up a pool and open up a loan, and take out $200,000 or $100,000 or $1 million or greater, the amount of fees that you would pay would be like 99% or something crazy high. And you would end up just losing huge amounts of money, in which case the protocol would burn a bunch of rune that would never get minted back. LPs would profit greatly from that scenario as well. And so you would just end up just shelling large sums of money into the protocol, and everybody else would, arbiters would profit, LPs would profit, nodes would profit, rune holders would profit just because there's less rune in circulation. Like everybody would profit except for the attacker in that scenario. That's like one of the important concepts of how we protect ourselves from price manipulation. But there's also a secondary purpose of this that's actually I feel is kind of quite interesting, quite important, is that because these pools are reactive to large trade volumes passing through these pools that you would need to do in order to price manipulate, they also protect us from theoretical bank runs, right? Because if a bank run were to occur, a bunch of people trying to leave all at once, the trade volume would increase for the Bitcoin pool, just say, or for the Tor asset as well, and the virtual pools become very shallow. Fees will go up, and it's kind of conceptually similar to some degree about like Bitcoin's design of, if everybody's trying to transact a Bitcoin transaction, right now, then the fees go up, right, quite significantly. We saw that with like BRC20s and ordinals and that kind of stuff. And you can still transact if you want to. You can always leave whenever the hell you want to leave, but you're going to have to opt into a higher fee because everybody else is also trying to leave, which is what normally happens in just about any markets for the most part. And so in this, if there was a scenario which there was some sort of like bank run thing kind of trying to occur, it would become expensive for people to leave, and they can choose to leave if they want to, but they would pay higher fees, which would protect the network from any kind of like inflation of the rune asset.
Okay, cool. So really, the harder someone tries to, attack the network, the harder the network pushes back and gives them less liquidity. So it's diminishing returns. You're better off just trying to not price manipulate the network, and you're going to get a fairer deal. Yeah, the more you attack it, the more it's going to push back.
Right, and that's like going to affect regular like borrowers in the sense of like, if today is a very volatile day, like rune's price is pumping or dumping, or Bitcoin's price is pumping or dumping, then there's going to be more trade volume passing through those pools, which cause the virtual pool to become more shallow, which will be less optimal for somebody who's borrowing to open a loan or borrowing to close your loan. And so there will be an aspect to be like, you want to close your loan or open a loan at times when there's like not much happening at all, everything's pretty quiet. That's probably the most optimal time to do so. But if you want to do it through very volatile times, then that would be more expensive for you.
And that actually is, how do you protect the normal user that doesn't want to do this, being caught up in this? And I know that there are minimums that are going to be put out that interfaces should be displaying. So if I take a loan out now and I've got this collateral, I've got 1 BTC, this is the amount of debt I should expect. And then they can decide whether or not that's a good deal, or they perhaps want to wait until everything settles down. That's correct, yeah?
Yes, that works in both directions, both in opening a loan and also closing a loan. So if there is a situation where like you want to close a loan, you can specify like, well, if I get back this much BTC of my collateral, then go ahead. And if I get back that amount, which is a lot less, then don't worry about it. I'll close it tomorrow when things are less chaotic or whatever. That just allows you to protect yourself from things being shifted underneath your feet as you're trying to open a loan or as you're trying to close a loan. it wouldn't affect you. You would just get a refund in that scenario. No different than if you were to swap right now on THORChain and you say, hey, I want to get out, 2.5 ether on the other side of this trade. If you can't satisfy this requirement, then just give me my refund and give me back my BTC that I gave you minus the fees.
Awesome.
And I would just love to point out how just like innovative the virtual pool depths on the derived assets really is in terms of just functionality and what's possible. THORChain is unique in its ability to do that. It's able to look across blocks in order to price loans. It's also it's just like in Ethereum, for example, on an Ethereum lending platform, all of these sort of manipulation style attacks are possible because people can use flash bots bundles to essentially do 50 different things in one transaction. Those types of scenarios aren't possible with THORChain. So it's just because we are sort of a sovereign L1 and we actually control the guarantees around slip-based fee model, the outbound delay, all of these sort of defense mechanisms that we've built into the network do stand to position us better than I think from the day one, the what's going to make the biggest splash is the fact that we're effectively the first DeFi lending platform for UTXO chains like BTC. That's never been done before at all. So that in and of itself is a major feature. But I think once people start looking into it more and really realizing what is possible with THORChain and how much better it is than the design of, say, a general purpose computing blockchain like Ethereum, they'll realize that this is actually like just by virtue, again, of us being our own sovereign blockchain, we're able to build a much more secure and a much better, basically give the end user a much better deal. So I wouldn't be surprised if we actually start becoming competitive in the ETH DeFi loan world. Which if we can successfully, I think we'll be able to dominate the market for BTC loans. But if we can also be very competitive in the ETH world as well, that's going to be huge as well. So just really cool. I mean, I've spent hours banging my head against this design, trying to figure out ways to manipulate it, and have come up short every time. So it's it really is a technical innovation more than anything else. It's very, very impressive. So hats off to Son of Odin and the other core devs again for figuring out how to do all that.
Yeah, thanks. One of the funny things, by the way, about that topic is that one of the ways to price manipulate on a chain link or one of these kind of oracles is you can just make large changing and swaps and manipulate exchanges. Exchanges. That's the first part. But then the common thing people say after that point is like, oh, well, why don't we just do a TWAP, right? Or a weighted over time perspective of like, oh, you have to maintain this Bitcoin at $100,000 for X amount of time. And that just means that it doesn't actually stop people from doing it. It just makes it more difficult to accomplish the task. And in our case, if you try to TWAP your attack on the system, it would not even function. You could do it. You could sustain it for 3 days if you really wanted to, and it wouldn't allow you an opportunity to be able to do that in a profitable way. It's actually it's a very different structure from everything else we've seen in the industry, which is quite fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. It would be a massive donation to the LPs. They would be very happy about that.
Right, because if you're initially priced to 200,000 BTC, obviously there's a lot of trade volume passing through, so LPs are getting a lot of money, nodes are getting a lot of money. But then also our bots are pushing against you, right? You're pushing the price $200,000. You're the malicious attacker, and arbs are like, well, no, Bitcoin's price is at $30,000, so I'm going to go keep on swapping in the other direction. And you have this kind of butting in the heads, and for every time that an attacker swaps in the wrong direction, arbitrage bots are swapping in the reverse direction and profiting greatly from that scenario. So it's just how long can you survive just giving free money to the world in a literal sense? And still be able to make a lot of money on the other side of it. It's just I haven't been able to see a practical methodology of accomplishing that.
Awesome. Thanks for that. That's good. I just want to leave with talking about risk. So for the normal user, we know that the lending is going to be great terms you can't get anywhere, zero liquidation, no time periods, and zero interest. So that's great. There's a bunch of network benefits. What are the risks that users need to be aware of when going in? I'm just thinking, like, there's obviously the standard protocol risk. There's the risk that lending mints more room, and we've kind of talked about that. Are there any significant risks you want to expand on those two risks, or any other risks that a normal user should know before they take out a loan?
If you want to say from the borrower's perspective, they only really have one question they need to answer, right? Like they, from a borrower's perspective, they don't care about the protocol itself in the sense that they don't care about the rune price, right? Because the rune price is they are detached or decoupled from that thing. They're only price exposed to Bitcoin and effectively the dollar. And so, like, they don't really care if the rune price is going up or down. It doesn't really affect them very much at all. Maybe ancillarily, like, it causes the liquidity of the pools become more shallow, which is not good for them because they pay more fees when they exit. But structurally, it's not that big of a deal. And so, like, from the network's perspective, in order to give those borrowers kind of like the peace of mind, in a sense, there's like one golden rule that we have to maintain, right? If we want people to stay opening loans and keep utilizing the feature and keep driving more value to the protocol itself, to the Rune asset itself, then there's one golden rule we just cannot break, right? And that golden rule is your collateral. You can always get back the collateral, right? You gave us one BDC, and you can always close your loan at an appropriate, ratio, like in terms of maintaining that quote unquote peg, although a peg's not really quite maintained in the traditional sense of it, but like that you can always get back your collateral. If the scenario rises up that like your collateral is at risk, or whatever happens, or whatever, like that would be the worst case scenario to give doubt or fear into the borrower to cause them to want to exit or to feel the need to exit. So that's the most important thing is we maintain that, like, that we tell borrowers that you can close your loan anytime and get your collateral back minus the fees that you pay to do so. And as long as that is true, then like borrowers have basically nothing to worry about other than just general protocol risk, which is kind of goes without saying.
So I think the only thing, if I could think, you can always get your collateral back, but touching what we touched before, because if there's a high trading or there's something happening, you may not, how to say that the amount of debt you need to pay may change, if that makes sense, because of the slip. There might be, if there's a high slips scenario, you'd need to put more in order to pay off the debt. Does that make sense?
Right. So in a hypothetical scenario where, so the amount of THOR that you, yes, the debt's the same as, it's like, say you owe 2,000 THOR, but if everybody's trying to close their loans, or there's just a huge volume going through the stable coin pools, and then the depth of the THOR pool would be very shallow. So instead of paying back $2,000 to close in that particular minute, you'd have to pay, 2,100 or 2,500 or 5,000 or 100,000. I'm making up random numbers here, but like depending upon the depth of that pool, right? So, so you might have to pay more to close it in order to get back your collateral, and then when you get back your collateral, there might be also, shallow depth at that time too. So you should be smart about when you're opening and when you're closing, but you can always close and get back your full amount. Or pay back the full amount and get back your full amount in kind of more dust settled kind of scenarios. So people should always keep that in mind.
That's all the questions I've got prepared. I'm happy to hand it over to anyone else that's got questions.
Yeah, I'll just kind of wrap it up with one more question before we move to take questions from the audience. So I think, and sort of the biggest thing that we as a community need to figure out now is what are the different levers that we can pull as we launch this feature. So, Son of Odin, will you just give a quick rundown on what the different, what the lending lever kind of entails, and maybe you can give your personal opinion on, where you think we should start that out at, and potentially, what the implications are of a higher lending lever, and how that impacts the collateral ratio. I know this was discussed on your video, Chris, but maybe we could just touch on that quick, because those are really those combination of constants are the things that everyone in the community needs to be thinking about, and providing their feedback on, so that we can come to a consensus about that. So yeah, just quickly, like, what are the different levers? What are the discretionary variables at play in the lending feature?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of Mimirs too. There's probably close to 10 or something like that in total. Some of them are just like, not a big deal or worth talking about. They're just they're there for options if we need them. But the first one I would talk about is, like, there's a mirror configuration that is basically tells the network how sensitive the virtual pool depths are to trade volume, right? And so we can configure that to be very sensitive, which is very conservative and very protective of the network, or we could be very liberal about it and have it be very loose and allow trade volume doesn't cause much of a shift in the virtual pool depth. That's just kind of like, we could sit anywhere we want on those two ends of the spectrum. My intention, my personal opinion, is to start moving more on the conservative side to begin, and especially in the earlier days of the protocol, just to start more conservative, and we can kind of walk it down if we want to. But we can just keep an eye, like, on that particular one. We want to look at, like, in a given week or a given month, like, we want to make sure that the virtual pool depth is within 3 to 5% of the layer one that it's representing, or that the counterpart is to. And as long as we keep that, like, 3 to 5% within range of it, for 95 or 98% of the time of a week, any given week or month, then that's probably a good target to make. That's how I look at it personally. People can have their own opinions, of course. And then in scenarios where there's, like, a lot of volatility, then that would pop out of out of that 5% range. It would go to 10% down, or 30% down, or maybe even greater if there's an actual attack going on. That's the first one people can talk about, and we're still kind of looking at the data. We've been running the virtual pools on mainnet for several months now, just to kind of watch the data and see what is a reasonable number. Right now, it's configured to be a little bit too sensitive, and we should probably tweak it. My inclination is, like, maybe closer to 50 or 60% is the number that I would kind of argue for. That's the first one. And then the next one is the lending lever, or lever, if you're from what part of the world you're from. That one just tells the network, like, hey, we have this much room burnt, right, out of the circulating supply. So right now that's 15 million. That'll probably expand to 20 million over the coming months post lending, hopefully. And so of that room, that 20 million, like, how much do we want to of collateral value do we want there? And so right now, my recommendation is to be around 33%, or 1/3. So it'd be about, out of that 15 million, it'd be a 5 million kind of calculator in a sense. So that 5 million we have, I'm referring to the lending lever, is there to help determine what the collateralization ratio is, or the LTV, if you're coming from other DeFi projects. And so that is where the min CR and the max CR comes in. Min CR is the very first loan to be opened would be the min CR, whatever value that. Let's just call that 300%, for example. So a 3-to-1 ratio. You put in $3 of collateral, you get $1 of debt. And so that would be the first loan would be slightly more than 300%, 3-to-1 ratio. And then if you burned all that room to get to the cap of that 5 million cap of the value of the collateral is equal to 5 million rune, then that last loan would be the max CR, which would be, let's just call it 1,000%, which is a 10-to-1 ratio between every $10 of collateral you get $1 in debt. And so, like, that's the kind of how we scaled up a feature, right, in terms of that. So the larger collateralization ratio, the less of a tasty snack the borrower's getting, in matter of speaking, but that's better for the protocol. It means the larger net room that's burnt. So in a 10-to-1 ratio, you are burning 10 million 10 rune and you're minting 1, right? Versus if you're burning 3 rune and you're minting 1, so that ratio between the two, so the net burn is higher for higher collateralization ratios, and that just becomes like the thing that the network kind of is balancing with, right? In terms of the market demand for a loan of these types of features or attributes, what are they willing to take? And so we'll find out over the course of the few months after lending launches of what is the collateralization ratio that people are willing to take, what is the collateralization ratio that people are not willing to take, and what is that kind of happy medium with the market determines over time. Those are the 4 major ones that I would talk about. There's probably another 5 that we could talk about, but they're probably not as valuable. Does that make sense, Pluto? I'm not sure if you heard me there or not.
Yeah, I think he's having connection issues. So, yeah, any outstanding, or yeah, thank you, Son of Odin. Any outstanding questions that folks want to raise? Otherwise, we can wrap things up for this round of Q&A. Let's see, I'm
one
seeing.
One thing I actually brought up is that people should understand about the way that the cap is hit on lending is that it's not about the total rune that lending has burnt. Like we set the max cap at 5 million rune, for example, the total amount of rune burnt can exceed the 5 million. It can go on to 30 million, hypothetically speaking, just because it's not based upon, it doesn't track how much rune has been burnt and then stops opening loans at that point. It looks at what is the value of the collateral that the network currently has open versus the value of the rune asset, 5 million rune cap, and what is the ratio between those two things. So hypothetically, like we could max out the TVL, hit the cap of 5 million, and now no new loans will open, right? In this hypothetical scenario. But then the next day, rune's price, let's just say the rune's price doubles, right? For some reason, whatever, it doesn't matter why. And so all of a sudden you've gone from hitting the max cap of 5 million rune to now the utilization's at 2.5 million, not 5 million, because the value of the collateral is now worth 2.5 million rune, not 5 million rune. So now the lending is now open again, right? And as this happens and rune's price doubles versus relative to the asset in this hypothetical scenario, not only does that open up more loans to be open, but the collateralization ratio of those loans would be halfway between the max CR and the min CR. So if it's like 300% and 1,000%, it is dead even between those two things, which would be like 6.5, something like this. So like you're now getting a 650% collateralization ratio in those particular loans. So like it is possible. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it is possible. It all depends upon how much of an effect that this lending feature has on the rune price, which I don't really have a good answer to that perspective. It could be a small amount, it could be a very large amount. I really don't actually know, to be honest with you. But like if the price of rune moves like hard with this feature, then we don't need to increase any kind of caps. We don't need to burn rune from the reserve, the standby reserve, like Pluto was talking about earlier. It could just scale on its own without us needing to do or touch anything. If the price effect that this has on the rune asset is on a smaller degree, then we can talk about expanding the caps in a larger way. But it's possible that we won't need to do so at all. I don't know which one it's going to be honest with you. We'll find out with time, but that's certainly a possibility.
Awesome, thanks. Kenton, welcome.
Hey, great. Thanks, guys. Actually, I have several questions. I just want to go back to if everyone's clamoring to pay back the loans all at once, and that moves the virtual pool so that you mentioned, like, say your loans is 2,000 and maybe you have to pay back 2,100 or 2,500. Can you explain that a bit further to me?
You're right. So if So when you're paying back your loan, you're not paying it back in the Tor asset, which is the asset that the network needs to receive to pay down your debt. Instead, what you're paying back is Bitcoin or Tether or any more or less arbitrary asset that THORChain supports. And so you might send it $2,000 worth of Bitcoin, but because of the swap fees going from Bitcoin to Rune and then Rune to Tor, we receive not the $2,000, we receive $1,950, right? So now you're $50 short of the debt. So you have to kind of like, when you owe $2,000, you're not going to pay back $2,000. You're going to pay back 2,050 or 2,010. I don't know what that depends upon pool depths and such. So you actually have to overpay your loan just a little bit to kind of get to that place. But if the virtual pools are very shallow because of a lot of volatility, people are trading, blah blah blah, whatever the hell's happening, then you have to overpay even more so. So you got to pay back $2,500, $2,700, $5,000, whatever the hell the number is, depending upon the depth of those pools at the time. So you can pay it back now and pay more money and pay back your loan now, or you could pay it back tomorrow when things are more chill and relaxed and there's not like a lot of volatility happening, and pay back $2,000. That becomes like an incentive for people to kind of like chill out now and come back tomorrow. Whereas in Terra's case, it was the inverse, right? So like Terra had like the LFG had like $6 billion worth of Bitcoin, and they felt that, we're going to support the UST coin and back it by all this Bitcoin. But that creates the wrong direction of behavior that you want, because once things start to depeg, people start saying to themselves, well, if I leave now, everything's backed by Bitcoin, so I'll be fine. But if I leave tomorrow, the Bitcoin will be gone, and then I'm going to be losing a bunch of money. So that just creates a circular motion of like everybody to leave now and as fast as possible, which is the worst thing you want people to do in that scenario from the network's perspective. So this basically inverses that and pushes the other direction. It's like, no. If you want to leave now, you can if you want to, but you're going to pay more in your debt and you're going to get less of your collateral back. Like, this is not the greatest time to do so. Have fun if you want to, but if you don't want to, you want to get pay less and get more, then come back tomorrow. And that just kind of creates the proper kind of like mentality we want people to have to fight against the psychology, the market psychology of some sort of flood event occurring.
I got it. So the debt in Tor doesn't change. You just might take 2,600 worth of Bitcoin to pay off the $2,000 in Tor. Okay. So then, Okay. So then the next thing is, remember a few months ago, I think it was on Trust Wallet, somebody did $1 million swap for Bitcoin to ETH, and they got $700,000 worth or something like that. And it was just, it was all slip fees, right? They just shouldn't have done it. And, there's a bit of, debate about, well, this is, it's not THORChain's responsibility. It's the front end's responsibility to communicate that to their users. So I'm curious, with this scenario, this setup with lending, again, is that going to be up to the front ends to communicate to the borrowers to be like, hey, this is not a good time to be paying back your loan. Wait until tomorrow or whatever. Right.
So from THORChain's perspective, we were communicated against, and that particular like swap of $1 million, and they personally got back 700,000, whatever the hell numbers were. Like, THORChain was communicated of what they wanted the behavior to be, right? The swap, when they swapped, included a trade target, which in this particular example may have been 0, for example, in which case you have communicated to us what you want the behavior to be, and we're just executing as you tell us to, right? If that's not what the user intended, then the Trust Wallet sent the incorrect memo to THORChain, or whatever the UI we're talking about is, to communicate what the user's intentions are, right? So it's the same thing here if you're using a UI and they're not implementing and they're not asking the question to the user or implementing some methodology of telling us a good amount of like, okay, I'm putting in X amount and I want to receive Y out on the other side. If you're not accomplishing that task, then there's nothing we can do about it. Like, in all cases, in all scenarios, you are communicating to the THORChain what your intentions are, as the memo states to us. Whether that is accurate to what the user wants, that's up to the UI or UX to align those two things.
And I get that, but is it something that I guess in realms that when you guys are talking to the interfaces, you're gonna be like, hey, this is something you're going to want to program in. This is something you're going to want to communicate to your users.
Right. If
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken, I hope I'm not, is that the quotes endpoint for opening and closing a loan will tell UIs of like, if you're going to open and close this loan, this is the amount that you need to send to do so, and this is what you would get back, right? Like that should be communicated to the user. We already gave like the power of the UIs and UX to know this number. It's like it's in the quotes endpoint that they all utilize, and so you just have to surface that to the user and say, "Is this what you want?"
Cool. Okay, and then the soft launch. When we went from ChaosNet to mainnet, it was probably about a good 6 months of stability, and then you guys are comfortable, and it's like, okay, let's announce mainnet. Do you have like a kind of time frame in mind for this soft launch that you kind of want to see everything stable, everything okay? Like, are you thinking 1 month, 3 months, 6 months? Do you have a time frame in mind before you actually open it up bigger and start promoting it and, hey, everybody come use this type of thing?
I think that's a question for Pluto.
Yeah, I mean, I this is just again my opinion, but and it'll have to be like an ongoing discussion with the community, but I think if everything is trending in the right direction, I think 2 months should be enough time to collect adequate data to make that call. But again, at the end of the day, we're gonna basically see what Block Science comes back with in terms of their recommendation, in terms of what those milestones or success criteria would be, and as long as those are all laid out up front, it could be relatively quick that we hit like the lending lever defined maximum lendable rune, and at that point, we can keep the feature open for however long we want to. But what we need to do is determine like what we're looking for. Are we looking to see people start to pay off their loans? What happens if people take out the maximum allowable loans and sit on them, and that's pretty much all the data we have to work with. I think in that scenario, it would only be natural to assume that the product is successful and working as intended, and continue to ramp it up conservatively. But at the same time, I don't really see there being so much that can happen in the first or the second versus 6 months in terms of changes in behavior. All we're really going to see is the market take a shift in direction, and as we've kind of said before, like, or at least what I've said before, is like a little bit of the secret sauce of launching this feature has to do with timing. So it's actually in the protocol's best interest to let out more loans when we're in a bear market, and to not necessarily let out as many loans when we're in a bull and everyone's peak greed. So and it's interesting. Like, I don't know, I don't want to rant too much about kind of what the decision making should be 6 months from now, because there's so much that is still left to be seen. But personally, I would be happy with just like 1 or 2 months of seeing things moving in the right direction before having the discussion about opening the floodgates.
Okay, cool. And then what exactly happens at the 500 million circuit breaker? Like, does everything with lending just get frozen? Or is it like you can still open a loan, you just can't close the loan?
Chat, I can take that one. Yeah. So basically, what happens?
I added Pluto because you getting some feedback in the audio. Can you answer the question again?
Actually, I am as well. When we get the 500 million circuit breaker, what exactly happens? Does all of lending just stop, or can people still take out loans, just not redeem them?
So if the circuit breaker is actually hit, it does trigger the network to stop opening new loans. You can still pay back any loans you currently have, and you can go ahead and close loan if you choose to do so. But new loans would not be able to be opened at that time. And I think if the scenario were to happen that we did hit that 500 million cap or whatever, we hit the circuit breaker, then I think that would just trigger a series of kind of questions in the community about, we got to this place, we didn't think we were going to get here. Is something wrong? What is that wrong thing? Should we just sunset the feature and say, we tried this experiment, didn't work as expected, let's carry on and kind of sunset the feature entirely? Or is there just like, hey, you know what, we noticed this behavior, and if we change this, if we tweak this one thing over here, then that would fix the problem, and we want to continue on, and maybe at that point we'd burn some room from the reserve to kind of kickstart lending again, possibly. Like, there's a whole series of things, but I think that it's intended to, like, if we get to that circuit breaker, to just basically kill the ability to open loans and allow people to close their loans, and just have a community discussion about, do we want to maintain this feature? Do we want to tweak it? Do we want to kill it? What it is? And to be honest, it's like really impossible to say which one we would do unless we have the data and the knowledge of the situation of how we got to the place we got to, and we can really take an informed perspective on what is appropriate for the network.
And when you say people could still close their loans, then that ruin would come from the reserve to close out the loans.
Correct.
And they would,
at that point. Yep.
And they would be able to close them out whenever. Like, it wouldn't be like automatically everybody gets closed out. It would still be up to the user to decide when they want to close out the loan. The reserve will honor it whenever.
Yes, that's how it's currently designed. Correct.
And then I guess I'm wondering, why not? Why stop it altogether? If taking out a new loan is deflationary for Rune and we want the supply to go back down, why not leave it open to be taking out new loans?
So the assumption is that if we get to that place, which is a place we don't expect to get to, then we should pause things and do an analysis of, how is lending performing? Is it performing well or not? Or if it's not performing well, why is it not performing well? Is it because of X, Y, and Z? So we might come to the determination at that point of, like, maybe we want to continue to allow loans to be open, beyond that point, and because we've just changed some functionality, or we added an interest rate maybe, or something. I don't know. Who knows what that will be? But like the idea is that we force the community to have a pause, right? Like imagine if Terra for a moment had a max cap, right, of a million or a billion tokens, let's just say, and the cap was hit automatically once it got to that place. That would just force the community to, at that point, to determine what they want to do, and you would give the community time to, like, respond to the situation that's happening and say, oh, things are going in this direction for some reason. What can we do to change it, to correct things? Not just let the supply go up to 1.3, 4 trillion, where the hell the number was for Luna, whatever that case was, but just like give us a marker, right? Like, this is the marker we're gonna set, and like if we get to this place, we're gonna pause things and we're gonna discuss as a community of what the next steps are.
Yeah, and I think if I'm just trying to do math on the fly, that might just end up draining the reserve too, and just put THORChain in a worse position. So
right.
Okay.
Which is why we want that kind of automatic marker of, like, the wrong direction. We want to, sever the gangrene leg in a matter of, like, if the leg is actually gangrene, or can we just do some surgery to fix that leg and continue walking, in a matter of speaking. So it's just like it's a marker for us to pause and, like, what do we want to do here? Do we want to kill it? Do we want to fix it? Do we want to do what? And we can just have that discussion and debate in the community.
But the best thing is borrowers don't have to be worried about not being able to redeem their collateral. There'll be more than enough for the reserve to cover it.
Right.
So that's
sure.
good.
Like that. It'd be it'd be extraordinarily unlikely the reserve. I mean, like, that'd be ridiculous if that was the case. Like, we have 170 or 180, whatever, like 160, whatever the hell the quantity reserve is, like over a 5 million rune loan. Like, that's just nutty if we got that scenario. But we want to have that ability to determine if this is something we want to, it's trending in the right direction, the wrong direction, and what can we do to change it.
Yeah. Okay. And then just one more question, guys. And I know I've asked this before. I'm sorry, I forget.
Sorry. One more point on that before we carry on.
Sure.
Is the one thing I said earlier is that the one golden rule we don't want to break is tell people that they can't get their collateral back, right? If we tell people, like, hey, in this situation, if we hit the 500 rune cap, you can't get your collateral back, that's going to, in my opinion, manifest us hitting that cap, because people are like, well, I better get out now, because if I wait till tomorrow, I won't be able to get my collateral back, which in itself will create like a rush to the door, in a matter of speaking, for everybody to exit as the closer we get to that 500 number, right? So in order to protect the network, not protect the network, but in order to create the correct psychology that we want within the market, it's like, you know what, you don't need to rush to the door for 4,999,999, whatever. Like, you'll still get your collateral back, to not create that, like, oh, I'm not going to get my collateral back today, but I won't get my collateral back tomorrow if I wait, so I better do it now. That's like the one thing we don't want to do, is to create that kind of psychology in the market.
Yeah, 100%.
Yep.
Okay, and then one last question. So Tor, Tor drives its price from the median price of all the stable coins, right?
Yep.
Right. Okay. So then, and I know I asked this before, I'm sorry, but I forget. But what happens if Big Brother decides, you know what, we're freezing all these stable coins, and all these banks, these stable coin issuers, they have to freeze everything, or freeze THORChain pools, or whatever. What happens then?
So that depends on the exact scenario. So, for example, if USDC, for example, decided to freeze all the USDC and THORChain's addresses, all of its Asgard addresses, it theoretically could do that. In which case, what we would do as a community is that we would just remove USDC from the calculation. But even at that case, like, effectively at that moment, the ratio between Rune and USDC is more or less fixed in a matter of speaking. Technically not true, because of like your ability to withdraw single sided, blah blah blah. But like, so that you would call it basically like a DPEG within THORChain's perspective of the Rune to USD ratio. And so that is not a problem. It sounds like a problem, and it's actually not a problem, because it's only one asset. We take the median of all of our stablecoin pools, and so if one pool goes awry, then it doesn't actually matter. It doesn't actually affect anything at all. And then we can, using Mimir or the nodes, can just go ahead and vote to remove USDC from the calculation of that Tor virtual pool. That's kind of the first component. Is that we have that ability to immediately respond to a scenario where something depegs and just remove it manually by the Mimir or nodes. But we don't even have to do that when it actually does happen. The network actually dynamically kind of responds to the situation on its own, unless you get to like 51% or greater of the pools that make up the Tor pool are all depegging simultaneously, which I don't think we've ever seen that in crypto's history that I can remember, at least. We've seen USDT peg, we've seen USDC peg, we've seen everything more or less to peg at one point or another, but not simultaneously. If that were to happen and they were all simultaneously depegged, well, then we would just basically pause lending or the ability to open or close loans during that time, wait for the dust to settle, wait for whatever the hell is happening to calm the hell down, and then resume lending at that point.
Okay, so that's if the pools depeg. What if the trading activity on the stablecoin stopped? Like, you couldn't actually move them. What if the issuer froze that address or wallet, and you couldn't trade in the pools, so there's no price being derived?
Right. Well, in that case,
same thing, I guess.
That would be effectively a quote unquote DPEG is probably actually the wrong term to use here, but like, it effectively creates a DPEG in that the pool price is not matching the market price of USDC, right? And so that's effectively a DPEG in one form or the other. It's too expensive or it's not expensive enough. Either direction, depending upon people who swap Rune to USDC, the swap will work and it will change the pool price. You won't receive your USDC on the other side, which sucks for you, but you can do that. Or if you are an LP in the pool, you can withdraw to Rune, right? If you're a dual-sided LP, if you're single-sided saver, which is not applicable in this particular case, but you can't withdraw at all, because you can make the request and it'll make the TX outbound, but it won't actually send you anything. So the actual ratio of the Rune to the asset would change based upon human behavior, but you wouldn't be able to receive your USDC that you're asking to receive, right? And so that just creates effectively a DPEG. Like, ARBs aren't going to ARB that anymore, right? Because they're not going to be able to receive. They can only receive in one direction, but not the other direction. And so they're just not going to, they can't close a loop. They can't make their profit. They're just not going to arbitrage anymore, which effectively means that the pool price will detach from the market price, in which case that's okay, right? Because you're taking the median of these pools, not the average of these pools. And so if one of them depegs or two of them depegs, that's not a problem at all, right? It just depends upon whether 51% of the pools or greater. That's when the problem starts. But we'll probably delist, USDC, the one that's depegging or whatever, before that it would even happen, most likely.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Yeah, I'm trying to think worst case scenarios. I know, everyone, some of us are paranoid about CBDCs and what that means for stable coins, and that's what's going to happen there. And I'm just thinking too about, we're kind of, we're relying on USDC and USDT and BUSD. If we have to go to new, if new stable coins come up, then I guess, how do those pools get created? Is it just kind of on the rest of the community to create a new stablecoin pool, or is it something maybe the Treasury, you guys would talk about the Treasury getting a new stablecoin pool, getting it in there?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, like the more stablecoin pools we have, especially across different chains, because like we might pause the Ethereum chain tomorrow because some sort of Ethereum, thing is happening, whatever. And then the network would dynamically just remove USDT and USDC from the Tor calculation and just rely on BUSD in that hypothetical scenario, just on its own behavior. We'll just do that just naturally. And so like it's the more stablecoin pools we add, whether it be Frax or LUSD or MIM or like whatever, like just insert stablecoin pool name here. The more we add, the safer it is from the network's perspective, right? Because that means that the larger the like all the stable coins would have to depeg effectively, or at least the majority of them. It makes it more difficult for us to get into a bad scenario with the more stablecoin pools we have. So I would certainly advocate, in my opinion, of the community or the Treasury, adding more tokens like Frax or LUSD or whatever it might be, pools to the THORChain, just to create more sources of input, right, and just give the network a greater sense of defense.
So let's go the opposite way. Everything's going great. Everything's awesome. THORChain's exploding in size and influence. And there's a euro stablecoin pool. There's a yen stablecoin pool. I'm assuming we could tweak lending to have Tor.yen, Tor.euro, right? It could be any currency where we have a stablecoin pool in.
Yeah, I think hypothetically speaking,
guys,
if the dollar were to come out as a token, and they would assumingly allow THORChain to exist for that token to exist on THORChain, whether it be the euro, the yen, the dollar, whatever, we probably wouldn't need Tor. We would probably just get rid of Tor entirely at that point, at least in my opinion. Like you wouldn't need Tor anymore, because Tor, the only reason why we have Tor at all is because the dollar does not exist on chain, right? It's an off-chain asset. And so we have to have these like derivative things and kind of create a calculation from a series of derivatives in order to create like a value. What is the value of a dollar relative to room? And so like if the dollar were to exist as like the official, digital dollar of the United States of America, or the yen or the euro or whatever, then we could create, you don't need derived assets that are some from multiple pools anymore. And you could hypothetically create a loan where instead of the dollar being your debt, it could be the yen, and it could be the euro, and it could be the ruble, it could be whatever, right? That's a possibility that we could do into the future, but that's obviously years away, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Let's keep this one on the existing mechanisms.
That's awesome. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Right.
And yeah, again, thanks for all your work. I know you guys work hard on all this stuff. It doesn't go unnoticed, and especially these calls and answering questions. It all really helps. Thank you.
Just to answer
guys,
one of the questions from the chat, and I haven't been paying close attention to the chat, so if I missed anything, people can, one of the other guys, or Chris, can jump on here and just ask me on the audio here. But like one question is like, why did we remove the ability for partial loan repayments? So there's a couple of reasons why that is that like it allowed people to leverage up against the protocol's interest to do partial repayments. So like, take a hypothetical scenario where somebody owes $1 million in debt, right? If you allow partial repayments, because when you pay back the partial amount, even if it's just like $10, some really small amount, the network would give you back part of your collateral, which would be worth maybe $15, right? And then you take that $15, you put it back in the network, and now you get back $25. You get $25, put it back in. Now it's $50, 50 to 100 and 1,000, and eventually you loop this enough times, and you can basically pay back any loan with any amount of money, right? And in a sense, you're actually you're basically using your collateral to pay back the debt in some effect. And so that's not necessarily good from the protocol's perspective to be able to do so. This feature, this lending design, is already sexy as fuck for borrowers. I mean, you're literally never gotten anything remotely close to this anywhere else in any market, DeFi or CeFi or otherwise. So we don't really need to make it more sexy for them because it's already absurdly sexy enough. And so it's better for the protocol to force people to pay back their loan in full before they get their collateral. In part because if you open your loan, there's a net burning of Rune. If you pay back your loan, there's a net burning of Rune. The only time there's a net minting of Rune is when the collateral comes back to you, when the loan is actually closed. So creating a loan and paying down the loan will both create positive effects for the protocol's perspective to do so. And furthermore, in a hypothetical scenario where the market's now bear, Rune's underperforming Bitcoin, because that's likely to happen, very likely to happen, I would even say. And we don't want people to close their loans in that particular scenario. So to create more asymmetric upside from the protocol's perspective and make it safer for the protocol, it's less likely that people will have the complete debt needed to pay back their loan in a bear market, because everybody's down their money in a matter of speaking, and so they don't have the money offhand. A lot of people won't have the money offhand to be able to pay back their loan, and that is assuming that the collateral is above the debt in that scenario. So it's just more protective of the network. It just it creates less of a downside from a network's perspective. It does make it a little bit less of a sexy deal from the borrower's perspective, but to be honest, they're already getting a pretty cherry deal. So I don't think they have much to complain about.
I just wanted to add to that. So, like, part repayments are possible, but you can't get your collateral back until you've fully paid the loan. So, as I understand it, lending will account if you've paid 50% off. It will show you paid 50% off, and it will know you've paid 50% off, but you can't get your collateral back until you've paid 100% off. So you can do the part repayments, but you can't get your collateral back. And then the second part of altering loans is that once you take out a loan, just say your collateral, I don't know, 3x's and stuff like that, you can't, and you've got a better collateralization ratio, as I understand it, you can't take that additional collateral that's increased and then add and expand your loan to take out more debt. You have to close that, take out a new loan. That's correct, right?
No, that part's not correct. So if you have a loan that's open and you want to take out an additional loan of the same asset, like Bitcoin is the collateral in this hypothetical, you can keep on opening loans to your heart's content. You don't have to close previous loans in order to open up new loans.
But you can't reuse that collateral. You can't reuse the collateral in an existing open loan for another loan.
Yes, if you want to reuse the collateral, then you have to fully pay back the loan, get back your collateral, and then open up a new loan in that scenario. But if you have more BTC that you just happen to have in your pocket, you can continue to open up more. You'll get a new collateralization ratio, not the ones you got when you opened your first loan, but this new one gets the current collateralization ratio, whatever the hell number that's going to be, and you can continue to add more collateral and then receive more debt. But when you do that, in order to get back any of your collateral, you need to pay back all of the debt. So you might have gotten 2,000, in your first debt, and then you open up another loan, you got another 1,000, now you owe 3,000, but you won't get back any of that collateral until the full 3,000 is paid back.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna jump in and do one more quick mic check here. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right, just making sure. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, just I know with other CDPs that if your collateral doubles, you can then increase the amount of debt, and you manage that because it's got a liquidation point on it. Whereas lending, this THORChain lending doesn't have that. You have the set collateral, you get a debt, and then you got to pay that off in order to get the collateral back in full. So it's a little bit different.
Right.
It's a bit more of a just set terms. And it doesn't change, which is good, but on the flip side, it doesn't change either.
This is actually one of the things I'm very curious to see, like the behavior, the market behavior of this, and is that like in a scenario where either the value of the collateral increases, right, and the CR is more or less stationary, then you can pay off your debt in full, get back your collateral full, and then put it right back in again, and now you have more debt than you had before. So instead of having $2,000, now you've got 2,500 or some number like this. Or in the scenario where the value of the collateral does not move, it's mostly the value of ruined debt and the dollar is all basically the same, but the CR decreases. You open your loan at 400% CR, let's just say, but now it's decreased to 325. Then you can go ahead and pay back your loan, and then get the same collateral, put it back in the system, and then get a higher debt than you had a moment ago. Like that's something people can do, and maybe we'll do that, right? We'll see. We'll see what the market behavior. That's one thing I'm actually curious to kind of observe. Once we see this thing actually trading, and or are people actually opening and closing loans?
Awesome. All right. So
just reading basic question here about marketing. So the question, here is just about like marketing and what our plans for marketing is. The way that I look at it, and this is just my 2 cents, and people are welcome to yell at me about it, but the way I look at it is that the protocol itself doesn't necessarily need to do lending itself. It relies on its partner to do the marketing for it. So it's up to if THORSwap wants to make some money and become a better UI and more competitive in the space, blah blah blah. Then they want to attract users to their THORSwap UI. Talking about lending and its capabilities and what it can do for them is basically the way that it's accomplished. And so instead of doing marketing like B2C, business to customer, we think about it. At least I think about it more of a B2B mentality. So I would hope that with time, wallets like Trust Wallet or THORSwap or whatever will just start to add more features and more capabilities of like right now, Savers is not supported by Trust Wallet to my knowledge, and neither is lending for that matter. But once it's live, we can kind of talk to them about it, get them to launch it within their own UI, and that becomes the marketing in a sense, rather than us having a marketing strategy ourselves. I mean, I'll still do interviews and stuff like that. If people want me to do interviews or whatever, but there's no concerted effort that I can think of.
I'll speak a little bit on this side of like I take a slightly different tack of, the interfaces do the marketing when it suits them, but in this case, in terms of usage, this is one of THORChain's most important features since protocol inception. This is a big moment to get right. And in terms of offerings to the market, last year a number of players blew their hands off because they were all playing with the same stick of dynamite. And so we're bringing something into a market that literally has no optionality aside of what we're delivering. And so, depending upon how we do it, on how and when we decide to do it, I like the idea of figuring out where and when to storytell. But I don't think we do it necessarily at the point when we just ship, the soft launch. I think we need to see this thing in the wild, make sure it's behaving correctly, have everything kind of lined up, have a few interfaces live, and be ready to rock and roll. And then we can kind of pop the cork a little bit and let the public know, because I think everybody here is aware that it's a $40+ billion market in terms of lending, and to service that with a protocol native approach is something that nobody has seen. And so I don't necessarily ascribe to the like let's let it happen. I am kind of the mindset of like let's make it happen, but let's make it happen when the time is right.
But if you say let's make it happen, from your perspective, what is the marketing strategy? Like, what are the steps that we would do?
It depends on
Spaces.
so there's a little bit of everything, right? It's like number one is, who are the launch partners in terms of interfaces that are lined up? How are things behaving? Do we have people who are going to take loans out and do things with those loans that we want to work with, and then tell the stories about those? It kind of all depends on how this thing comes together. So step one is get the basics right, have an understanding of soft launch. And then once we're kind of in that soft launch window, we'll start to line up on how we want to push things. But again, this is completely one-sided and just Gavin talking. So this doesn't represent like THORChain as a whole. This is just like, one team that's going to do something about this, and not just kind of like, I think it was Basics comment in there, fade into the background. I think we'd like to take a little bit of action here.
But the problem that I've always had, we've had this discussion in the community like time and time again about marketing in general. But the problem I've always had with this discussion is that people always talk about, hey, you should do marketing, but nobody has a marketing strategy or nobody has a marketing plan, right? Nobody comes forward and says, here are the actual tangible things we're doing. We're going to start a tweet thing. We're going to do 10 tweets per day. We're going to start, shilling money to bank lists to pay them to start talking about us or tweeting about us, whatever it is.
So
we're going to do these things. We're going to do that things.
To be specific on this side, putting that together, like the easiest thing in the world to do is say, hey, we're going to tweet X times a day, and we're going to reach out to the usual suspects in terms of bank lists and like, to be honest, I think a lot of that's bullshit unless we have a very sincere approach to how we want to tell the story around something that is a pretty groundbreaking feature that the protocol is going to offer. And so, no, I don't necessarily think it's just like reaching out to basically pay people to shill our shit. I think the right approach, or at least one approach, is again understanding who and how, like the people, the types of loans that are going to be taken, work with a few of those folks and tell that story. That's one. But the other side is, once we have some flagship integrations that launch with this, then we work with them to get the story in the right place, right? Like I said, like the easiest thing in the world to understand is that there is a multi-billion-dollar gap in the market because everybody was playing the game a certain way. Tide went out, nobody had shorts on. Everybody sees that. We're the first large-scale protocol to be able to offer something in this market. And so I'm not giving specifics about like the approach because we haven't lined up on that yet. We've, let's not put the cart before the horse. But as soon as we know the mechanics are working and we're in good territory, then let's figure out how we want to do it. And so, Son of Odin, you're absolutely correct. The most bullshit thing in the world to do is to say, hey, let's do it and not have a plan. But all I'm saying is that from our perspective, we're going to line up in the storytelling. It's not a blocker, it's not anything, and it doesn't put any burden on the treasury or yourself. This is just execution from my standpoint.
Yeah, I'm okay with doing marketing to some sense. What I'm concerned about historically, and I think Lena, agrees with this mentality, is that like it's easy to spend money on marketing. You could just dump money into that shit. But the question is, like, is it actually does it actually produce a result? Like, does it actually get you a larger community, people, learning and engaging with the protocol itself, like this kind of stuff? And to be honest, like, I don't know what that looks like. I'm not a marketing person myself. I don't know. I can totally think of some ways to do some marketing, and I can be quite confident it's just going to be a bunch of shills and paying people off to talk about the project or whatever. And it's just like, that doesn't feel good to me. I don't want to do that. I want the project to be successful. I want the marketing to be its value proposition. I want the marketing to be what it does. I don't want the marketing to be like we paid, some YouTuber, $10,000 or $200,000 or the hell the fucking number is.
Literally, to talk about it. Advocating for that, and I would completely agree with you.
I know, but what is the other thing? If it's not that, then what is it? Like, you're talking about storytelling, which is great. I mean, and it makes a lot of sense, but I still don't know what that actually means in like reality. Like, what are the actual steps?
So let's say that there's somebody who wants to take out a loan to do something with it. The narrative around that is, hey, I'm actually able to do something with my BTC that I've been sitting on for a while because I don't have to fill out a stack of paperwork, go through a centralized entity, and I can now use the USD to do something in my life because I don't have liquidation risk. Now, that's a narrative, that's a story around a specific use case. Is that what we have lined up? No, not yet. But in terms of specifics, it depends on the use case, like I said. So from my perspective, we got to get the basics right, and then you figure out the use case and the story around that. It's not like, hey, THORChain now does X. Yes, that's all going to be out there, but I think we're going to be a little bit more specific on it.
Right, but we've always done that concept. Like, having a story, we've always been talking about as a protocol and as a community about, we allow people to trade from chain 1 to chain 2 in a decentralized way. The story has always been there. We haven't been lacking a story. The question is more about, when it comes to marketing, it's not so much what is the story? I think we were quite clear on what that is. There's no debate on there. The question is, how do you get the story out there? Who do you talk to? What are the steps taken to do so? And I've yet to see anybody from the community or otherwise to propose a reasonable approach of how we get the story actually out there.
Because we've put zero rubber to the road on this. Like, in just in no uncertain terms, we've done zero work on the marketing around this or the thought into it. The most work we've done around marketing is actually integrations like landing TrustWallet and the big guys that are in the SAC coming up here. That's the most effective thing we can do. However, in terms of actual execution on marketing for this, like I said, rubber hasn't been put to the road. But I mean, like I said, it's May 30th. Another 4 weeks. Let's be talking.
All right. Well, I would love to talk about this. I just want to know what the actual tangible steps are. Not rubber meets road talk, because that means that's non-specific. It means nothing. I want to know what the actual steps are going to be.
Son of Odin, like I said, this is a chat about the mechanics, and when it gets to the actual marketing of this thing, we can have an entirely different chat, and I'll be happy to host it.
Cool. All right, guys, I hope I'm coming in right now, but yeah, this has definitely been tremendously useful, I think, at least for me. I hope for you guys in the audience. Great questions from you, Chris, on all of that. And Orion had to hop, but thank you to Orion for outlining Block Science's engagement with THORChain, their deliverers, and the contribution to ADR to basically land lending. So we've been on for about a solid 2 hours now, so I think now would be a good time to wrap it up. But we thank everyone in the community for joining. And yeah, we're really looking forward to getting this ADR off the ground here in the next couple weeks, getting the feature voted and enabled in mainnet, and then getting it scaled up. So I'd say, this has been an excellent group effort, and I wanted to thank everyone for joining. And we'll see you hopefully this Friday. Son of One, are you going to be back to doing bases anytime soon? Maybe this Friday we could fit one in.
Yeah, I think we rescheduled spaces to be, I think, Friday at 5 or 6, or I can't remember the exact time on Eastern Seaboard. But yeah, I think we're doing it next week. This week rather.
Awesome. All right. Well, there you have it, folks. We'll be able to continue this discussion and more this Friday. Join us again for the Twitter Spaces, and for all of those that are tuning in after the fact. In whatever medium this is posted, Twitter, just feel free to drop your additional comments and questions down there, and we'll be sure to continue to get the questions addressed by the community as we get going on these next steps. So thanks again for everyone who's joining, both now here live and after the fact, and yeah, stay tuned.
Thank you. I'm also happy to answer any questions on Twitter or through YouTube or Discord as well. Any questions that didn't get answered.
Thanks, everybody. Masterful hosting, Pluto.
Cheers. Take care.